Hello strategy gaming enthusiasts, my name is AlzaboHD, and in today's challenge video, we will take the Merchant of Venice to the Khanate of Kublai Khan. We will recreate Marco of House Polo, and attempt to emulate his travels by conquering our way across the Mediterranean, through the Silk Road, and ultimately to the court of Cathay. It's time to test Polo's potential, but republics are not yet playable in CK3, so we'll have to settle for the nearby fiefdom of Friuli, enable Iron Man mode, and say pronto to Polo. Que bello! The default settings already resemble Signore Polo. As one of the most famous merchants of history, Polo was known as Ilmilione, or the millionaire, and is thus a fortune builder beyond compare. But to make this a challenge, we'll balance his traits and his skills, and outside of his superb stewardship, Marco is a mediocre shipbroker. Our prosperous protagonist is now Count of Friuli, but can he reclaim his family name? Our aim is to become the Khan of St. John, and it's thus time to move on and take on the Yuan of Jourdan. But before we get started, this video is sponsored by Keeps. Keeps is an online subscription service that helps men keep their hair. Keeps is clinically proven to combat symptoms of hair loss, with treatments delivered straight to your door. They're only half the cost of pharmacy prices, and are supported by 24/7 customer support and a year of unlimited doctor messaging. If you or someone you know wants to keep their hairline from retreating from the field of battle, you'll be happy to know that most customers notice results within 6 months of starting treatment. This is excellent news for the over 66% of men that experience hair loss by the time they're 35 years old. Whether you want to protect your hair, stimulate hair growth, or prevent your hair from retreating, Keeps has you covered to prepare your hair with everything you need. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/AlzaboHD or click the link in the description. A special thanks to Keeps for sponsoring today's video. At the start of our campaign, Marco is a diligent, ambitious, and greedy goloso whose claim to fame was his economic domain. In real life, his wife was the noble Donata, but in our campaign, he'll have to settle for Dorian, a fecund female from Scotland. While not nobile, Dorian was nubile, and inspired our protagonist to fabricate a claim and reclaim his home isle of Venezia. Inspired by his father Nicolo, Marco set off for a business trip to Jerusalem, and was thus able to use the Pope as his personal pal. In celebration, Marco engaged in procreation, and soon Dorian spawned a son who she named Marco Piccolo. Our bishop fabricated claims on Venezia and Veneto, and with the support of the Pope, Marco declared war on Doge Domenico for the Isle of Venezia. Veneto was the first to fall, and in the space of 2 years, Venice came under Polo occupation. As is tradition, Dorian celebrated by siring our second son Carlo, while Marco took a pizza of Venezia and restored his rightful realm. But truth be told, Friuli was yet under the hold of Duke Berthold, so Marco had his mafia murder his liege to liberate his lands. But even though his landlord was canned, his son, Herman, held massive tracts of land, and Marco soon sought freedom for his fiefdom. In 1175, war was declared to free our Count of Friuli from the fold of Berthold, and Marco's mercenaries occupied Verona and Padua. His sovereign soldiers were stack-wiped in every fight, and after 6 years of minor maneuvers, Marco ordered his men into the lion's den. In spite of Alpine attrition, our Italian invaders succeeded in taking the crown capital of Württemberg, and by 1182, our only franchiser was the Imperial Kaiser. This appetizer was followed by the swift subjugation of the Serenissima, but forming a duchy requires money, so Marco sold off his minor titles, became known as a greedy Grinch, and was crowned Doge of Venice in 1084. In the following years, the Pope paid out, another son popped out, and the island of Cyprus was claimed for the Polo dynasty. In imperial affairs, an independence faction led to Venetian action, but rather than risk war, the Kaiser swore to fight no more and offered us independence from imperial dependence. But another empire was in decline, and it was now time to change the Cypriot paradigm. Using his claim on Cyprus, Marco sent his mercenaries across the Mediterranean and invaded the island nation. Roman resistance was stiff, but ultimately our coalition of Central European states subjugated the Patriarch and the subsequent Matriarch, and after 5 years of fighting, Cyprus profited under Polo protection. Marco now had a way to Cathay, but first he'd need to claim the Caspian coast of Shirvan. But before he could move on, the Principe of Papal Polities called for the First Crusade, and our corrupt court cardinal decreed that Marco and his Gaelic girlfriend were somehow related. There was no way to protest this charge of incest, and thus our Doge divorced Dorian and married a Hungarian princess who was herself an adulteress. The crusade was now at hand, and Marco was the first to land in the Levantine sand, with a command of 36,000 Christians to 17,000 Saracens. But despite these odds, the Allied army was annihilated in Acre, which made Marco a crusader. And in crusades, success is measured according to losses, and thus Polo plummeted his men into suicide strikes into Gaza and again in Tripoli, martyring all but 10 men out of an initial invasion force of over 6,000. Our Pope loved pointless slaughter, and soon Marco's delightful daughter was crowned Queen of Jerusalem on account of her father's fallen forces. Agustina was now an ally of her father's fiefdom, and in 1100 AD, Marco declared war on Shirvan and swept his soldiers across the Seljuk Sultanate. Father and daughter fought their foes in quite possibly the closest battle of history, but his son and heir was in prison elsewhere, with the Sheikh refusing to accept financial welfare. Marco was executed, and his brother Carlo became heir. But in matters of warfare, a Caspian report revealed the occupation of the Azeri nation, and our peace allowed the Doge to expand into Turkmenistan. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and subsequently the Sheikh who slew Marco the Piccolo was wined and dined to death, while the Caspian coast became a Venetian trade post. At long last, our Doge had the coin, and the counties needed to reforge his realm, and in 1109, the kingdom of Ilmilione was proclaimed after Marco's nickname. In the space of only one lifespan, the Count of Friuli became king, and through his avaricious adventures procured buckets of ducats. Between bouts of killing commoners, as is bourgeois tradition, Polo claimed the Beylik of Badashkan, but in the short term, our aging autarch fell infirm and used his final breath to appoint and anoint titles for his Polo progeny. As a greedy man, this loss of crest led to cardiac arrest, and Polo passed away due to hitting the level 3 stress threshold. Marco had left behind a legacy as the first European to cross the Caspian, and King Carlo the Clown now took the crown. The new plastered Plutarch of Ilmilione was a 37-year-old drunken degenerate whose severe stress we'd have to address. Carlo Polo broke out the bottle and soon broke bread with the sheep of Shirvan, but it did little to appease his ease. He stumbled through the forests of his fiefdom and finally found a female, this time of human persuasion, but his desperate pleas sent her further into the trees. Further flirtation led to frustration, and soon Iptek ran to Iran. And speaking of Iran, Carlo mobilized his command across the sand and soon took a stand in Badashkan. With Afghanistan in hand, the lands of Khotan were eager to join Carlo's kingdom, but back at home, Carlo's wasted wife met the end of her life, Bella Ciao, and she was traded in for a marriage with a 16-year-old Nepalese and a few thousand Gurkhis. To be sober is to suffer, and soon our sovereign's stress mounted, and the Pope paid off his pints. But drinking is haram, and soon Carlo's Saracen subjects rioted in revolt, while his sister, the Queen of Jerusalem, mounted a war for a claim on his reign. Andiamo, it's time to go west and put the kingdom at rest. With the Holy Land in hand, a white peace meant Carlo could push east, and soon Cotin would face the wrath of St. John. The Silk Road soon ran scarlet, and Carasirgan was conquered. The Pope paid our tab, and in 10 months the duchy belonged to House Polo. This land in turn was renamed to Bernardolo in honor of Bernardo, our figlio. In the following years, the surrounding states were subjugated, the itinerant Italian became infirm, and the mothered monarch made moves on Meninja. The Chinese crown was thus knocked down, and Carlo's nipote Alberto Polo now ruled the renamed Overtolo. But in spite of his aging inability, the king sought notability and declared war on the cognate of Great Liao. 1,000 nations of Christendom descended upon Khonshu, but before Carlo could fight in the shade, the Pope had paid his final pint. In his place, his 37-year-old son and heir, Lamberto, took the crown, but this Phantom of the Opera is there, inside his mind. Those who have seen his face drew back in fear, but those that sneer rarely last the end of the year. Lamberto, the Phantom of House Polo, executed his prison's population. The soldiers of the Danish nation were suffering dehydration, and our cousin's claim was eliminated when he was extinguished from the mortal plane. Lamberto lost his child and heir, and turned to despair, as his wife was infertile and he lacked the piety to divorce the queen by traditional mean. In her place, the teenage Changshao regarded his face and turned her frown upside down. Argentina had arrived, and Lamberto soon took to the bottle, but on the field of battle, the Great Khan's brother was captured with the conquest of Karakorum. Ilmilione now held millions of meters of Mongolia, and the progeny of Polo looked on in open hostility. There weren't enough Polos to people the Siberian steppe, and when Lamberto traveled to Jerusalem to recruit Palestinian Polos, he was met only by Bedouin proletarians who had kinda overthrown the descendants of his throne. The conquered Khans returned in bronze, but were soon gone, and to the west, the credit card crownhead declared a crusade to restore Jerusalem. But the only thing restored was the tiny county of Al-Karak. Fortunately, the Pope had paid our way, and Lamberto used the sacred subsidy to feudalize and capitalize Karakorum, now known as Polopolis, in the county of Marcokarum. Basso was birthed, Alte was annexed, and Sidi was ceded to Ilmilione. But the increasing stress of his success weighed upon our phantasmal protagonist, and when his guest spilled dirt on his shirt, the masked monarch fell inert. The legendary Lamberto leaves behind a legacy as the man who tripled the size of Ilmilione, and the crown is thus passed down to Peter Polo da Bazzolo. This Piccolo Polo was forced to share the fiefdom with Basso Polo, his 5-year-old fratello. Basso inherited Marcokarum, formerly known as Mongolia, and the two brash boys were not known to share their toys. Peter Polo proclaimed a war game, with the aim to reclaim his father's reign, and in less than 8 months, Basso lost the game. The kingdoms of Marcokarum and Ilmilione were once again reunited, but Peter was not delighted. His cousin Corrado corrupted the crownhead's childhood, and soon Peter Polo was bestowed with woe, but at least he didn't look like Count Signolfo, quanto sei brutto. In 1159, it was time for Polo's prime. But despite his education, the problematic Polo knew nulla of his family's occupation. A sacred sabbatical to Jerusalem, complete with nudist naturists, allowed Polo to obtain his Catholic credit card, and soon the sovereign sought to swipe and fight the Altaic autarchs around him. In less than 2 years, Avignon was annexed, a Byzantine bride was betrothed, Charklik was converted into spaghetti, and Polo was put into power, while Pilaf was back on the menu. The merchants of Markakarum traded in Tibet, and there was Nagormo going back. The pursuit of capital and buckets of PayPal ducats necessitated new markets, and now Tibetan yaks were sold in stacks. Peter's cursed Byzantine bride soon spawned Fortunata, and now Ilmilione had an heir to declare. But elsewhere, an air of despair would soon impair our welfare, as Turkic separatists seceded, our vassal subjects pleaded, and, more generally, every rebel rose to depose Polo's enclose. In the mountains of Markakarum, our monarch massacred his unloyal subjects, our Byzantine bedfellows broke down the Buddhists, and the Mongolians would have to step down. But Peter and his princes still held no sway in Cathay, and a holy war was thus lay on the Lady of Uruk. Our monarch's mercenaries descended upon China, while the Byzantines boated to Bangladesh and brought our army new flesh. Jingqing lay in the hands of our king, but our armies were taking a beating and ran to Turpan. Despite this lack of respite, our Roman reinforcements paved their way into Cathay, and by 1185, it was all over. The Cisalpine Crusaders now controlled China, and our king was thus proclaimed Emperor and Khan of Khans. Imperial Ilmilione was here to stay, but further away, another Khan might soon come this way. In 1191 AD, Patriarch Peter of the Polo polity controls all of Mongolia, northern Tibet, western China, the eastern Silk Road, Turkmenistan, Cyprus, and the ancient capital of Venetia. The capital of Ilmilione is centered around Polopolis, in the region of Markakarum, formerly the Mongolian capital of Karakorum. The Papist Polos have proselytized Catholicism from Cyprus to Cathay, and their Cisalpine culture has colonized Markakarum, the region of Alchir, Mongolia, Turkmenistan, and Cyprus. Reflecting this reappropriation of rightful rule, the realm has renamed their holdings after prominent Polo plutocrats throughout the kingdoms of Markakarum and Ilmilione, with the capital centered in Podopoliza. Emperor Peter Polo is a 47-year-old melancholic monarch married to the Byzantine princess Theophano, and together they have sired 3 daughters, including the realm's heir Fortunata of Ilmilione. House Polo boasts 70 living members spread across 6 cadet branches, and while most are landed within Ilmilione, Pandolfo Polo rules in perfidious Albion. While the Polo family no longer reigns in Jerusalem, Agostina and Ugo's phenotype persist in Padua. Bella ciao, Beatrice, and arrivederci. Outside of our transcontinental empire of Silk Road states, our allies in Byzantium boast the largest military in the world. The Pope has pilfered the Papist Peninsula, and a peasant proletarian polity of Bedouin workers has reappropriated the Holy Land from Polo power. These Catholic converts are kinda killing off Egypt with their massive military, and their neighbor Jerusalem no longer holds Jerusalem, or any Polo potential. With Christendom and Cisalpine culture converging upon the East, it's only a matter of time before all people parla Italiano and China falls to the Khans of St. John. Before ending the video, I'd like to thank everyone for watching this far and supporting the YouTube algorithm. If you'd like to see more CK3 content and want to help the channel grow, please consider fabricating a claim on the like button, sieging the subscription box, and dropping a comment within the void below. This video was made in partnership with Keeps, and if you'd like to learn more, I invite you to check out the link in the description box below. But if you want to boost relations even more, consider donating to our Patreon, buying games through our Nexus store, or donating basic attention tokens to AlzaboHD through the Brave browser. Avere una giornata fantastica. It's time now to roll the credits.